everyone, Karen the Warp Spinster here. Welcome to my miscellaneous Sunday, I guess. Last week on Instagram, I posted a photo of some diagrams that I was working on for a quilt pattern, and I was working in Adobe Illustrator. And one of my IG quilting friends asked me to expound a little bit on how I used Illustrator to do my quilt patterns. And that's what today is about. This is not a tutorial on using Illustrator. This is not a tutorial on how to write a quilt pattern. It's just a demonstration so that you can see the features in Illustrator, and this is just a small subset of what Illustrator can do, but how I am now using Illustrator to do the diagrams in my quilt patterns. And I will also explain to you about my Spinster Light pattern series that's coming up, and why I am using Illustrator especially for doing those. So I hope you enjoy the video. If you're interested in seeing how I use Illustrator, this will be for you. If you're looking for a tutorial of some sort, this is not the one for you, and I hope I see you in the future and in past videos. Enjoy. This is a typical workspace for me in Adobe Illustrator. When I open up a file, I can choose the size of my artboard. This white area here is called a whiteboard. I can choose that size, but I also have this space around here, the gray area, that I can work in. The artboard is basically your canvas. When I make that choice, I can choose whether I'm going to have my measurements in pixels, inches, centimeters, yards. I think they have. I'm sure they don't have miles, but you have options for what unit of measure you want to use. I typically use pixels because that's what I'm used to, but also because I can get very discrete with 1 pixel is a very narrow piece. So if I want to get really fine in how I'm snapping things or in the lines that I'm drawing, I can do that easily in pixels. A couple of things about Illustrator that I want to talk about. It's a powerful graphics program, which means it can do a lot of things, more than I am using. I use it for a lot of things, but I don't begin to use everything that it's capable of doing. As such, there can be a pretty steep learning curve for it. However, for what I do with quilt pattern diagrams, I don't need to use anywhere near all of those things. So the learning curve is not as steep for those aspects of it. The second thing is that Illustrator is now available only by monthly subscription. And the last time I looked, which was pretty recently, it was $20.99 per month with an annual commitment of at least, and it was around $32, I think. So you could go in and out as long as you had done a month and a piece of a month, I guess. So that can be quite a commitment of money and maybe outside of some people's budget to do this. If you think you might use Illustrator for other things, then it might be worth your investment. If you're accustomed to using Microsoft Word or Pages or Apple Pages, this demo is really designed for you because I want you to see how I use Illustrator and how that might compare with how you use another piece of software. You may decide after this that, yep, Illustrator's for me, I like what it can do and the possibilities for other things that it might do for me. Or maybe you'll say, no, what I have now is working fine for me and just as well as Illustrator would. I'm not connected with Illustrator in any way. I just use the program a lot, and I had someone on Instagram ask me to expound a bit on how I use it. So this is not a tutorial. This is not a sales job. This is just a demo to show you how I am now using Illustrator. One of the reasons that I have started using Illustrator more is, number one, I use it for other things and I'm very accustomed to it, but also because my new line of patterns that I'm working on, that I call Spinster Light, is designed for quilters who are fairly experienced and they don't need or maybe even want the text that is in most of my patterns. My patterns are designed to have detailed, clear instructions so that anyone can make them even if they're a beginner. So they're more detailed than some more experienced users might need. So an experienced quilter probably doesn't need to be told how to make a half square triangle, or that right sides always have to be together and you're using a scant 1/4 inch, etc., etc. So this new Spinster Lite is going to be probably a single page, double-sided page, and it's going to be heavily dependent on diagrams. So it's going to be more of a visual pattern. There will be text around fabric requirements and cutting, etc., but it's going to be heavily dependent on diagrams, which was a long way of saying I'm doing a lot of diagrams and I prefer to do them in Illustrator. Now, as I said, this is not going to be a tutorial. I just want to show you the kinds of things that we can do. So let's start out with the shapes. In Illustrator, you have options for shapes, and here we've got the rectangle tool is selected. I can right-click on that and see the other options, which are ellipse and circle. Polygon tool, this is how I would do triangles as I'm drawing it. I can tell it how many sides I want that shape to have. So I could also use it for doing hexagons, for example, or a star. And the line segment tool just draws straight, consistent with lines, which are important to me when I'm doing patterns. Let's start out with the rectangle. And you can see here we have keyboard shortcuts. The keyboard shortcut for the rectangle tool is M. No idea why, but it's M. I ordinarily use the keyboard shortcuts. That's one of the reasons that I like Illustrator, is because I know what they are and I can just go to town on the keyboard. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum today, because whenever I strike the keyboard, then the mic may pick up on it. And I've got my keyboard on my lap underneath the table, which I hope will help, but my mic is, sometimes too good. So I'm going to try to always do it over here, both so that you can see it's there, but also you don't hear me banging on the keyboard too much. All right, so I've got my rectangle tool selected, and as with lots of programs, all I'm going to do, I have to choose my fill and my stroke. Let's do a green rectangle. Just as in Word, Pages, whatever other program, you're going to have a fill and a line. Now the line, which is, say, the outline of a shape, is called a stroke in Illustrator. And this filled square here represents the fill, and this piece, hello Karen, this piece with the square cut out in the center, so it's basically an outline. A thick outline is the stroke. And you can choose colors, of course. So let's choose a black stroke and a green fill. And once I've selected M or the rectangle tool, then I can just pull it out. If I want it to be a square, I hold down the Shift key. Resizing is very simple. If I want to keep it in proportion, I'll just grab a corner here and hold down the Shift key, and that will lock that aspect ratio. If I want to change the width or whatever, I can just move it around. Now, I will note that in Illustrator you can also change just a single corner there. May or may not be important to you when you're designing. I don't often use it for quilt diagrams that I can remember, although I might use it to round something out. Anyway, so that's a rectangle and a square. The fill is pretty self-explanatory, I think. I can, as long as this shape is selected, I can go in and, wow, blind you with various colors. The stroke, you can change the weight on. And this is my stroke toolbar here. It has my properties of my stroke, and weight is one of the options. 1 pixel is fairly small. I'm zoomed in quite a bit here. And I can select the object and change the weight of that line. All right, that's probably a little more than I want it to be as I'm doing my demo. So I'll take it down to 5, which I think you can see, but won't be too outlandish. Now, if I want to do, say, a circle, then I go up here, I'm going to right click on this, which gives me the ellipse tool, and it's just like a rectangle. You have a stroke and a fill. You pull it out. If you can make an oval. If you want a circle, you hold down the shift key. And again, sizing, etc. is the same as with a rectangle. So shapes are pretty straightforward. Let me talk about the proportion of things a little bit, because I try and do that a lot with my patterns. If we look over here, this is the pattern that I'm working on for the Feynman Lives quilt. And you can see here that I've got a piece that is labeled as 1 1¼ by 3½ and another 1¼ by 3½. This piece though is 1¼ by 2 inches. Now if I am doing these two and they're supposed to be the same width, I want them to be the same width so that I can constrain it to 1¼ inches. But I also want this to be proportional. So if this is 1¾ by 3½ and this is 1¼ by 3½ and this is 1¼ by 2 inches, I want this 2 inches to look proportional to that 3 inches. So let's take a look at how I do that. Let me just get rid of this guy here. And again, do a rectangle. Let's say we'll do this. I'm going to take the stroke off just because it's annoying, and let's make it a little darker so you can see it better. Fill, Karen. All right. Now, so this piece, if I go up here at the top of the menu, I've got the shape here, and this is the width. There's a little piece here that shows me that's the width of it. It's 541 pixels, and the height of it is 62 pixels. Those are kind of random numbers, and would be difficult to work out if I'm figuring out proportions. So what I usually do is multiply it by, say, 100. So if this is to be, say, 6 inches long in the diagram, I'm not going to make it actually 6 inches. I could, but that's going to be larger than I want or need. So I'm just going to take that 6 inches, multiply it by 100, and change that length to 600 pixels instead. And then this, let's say that's an inch wide. Now let's say it's 3/4 inch wide. Then I'm going to change that, multiply it by 100, so 3/4 of 100 is going to be 75 pixels. And then I have the proportion. Now if I want another piece and say I want it to be 4 inches, then I'm going to go back up to shape, and sometimes it will display up here and sometimes you get the full dialog box. So this is the same thing though. It's the same size and proportion as the first one, but this time I want to make it 4 inches wide, so I'm going to make that 400 pixels. And you could use whatever multiplying factor you want to use. So now I know that that's in proportion to this, that it's 2/3 as wide as that. And that's one of the reasons I use pixels, because I can get pretty discreet with that. So that's shapes. We've talked about colors. There are lots of color choices. I can also go to the color guide, which will give me some tints and shades if I want. I can go to color and have the whole spectrum here that I can choose from. I can use specific hex numbers. I can use Pantone numbers. I can also, let me show this. If I want to, I'm going to add in a photo here. See if I can find a photo that will do what I want it to do. Should have had one of these out. Sorry about that. Let's say I'm going to, let's choose my zipped pattern here. And I'm going to place that here. And I want to match this color. So maybe I'm using a fabric. And if I take a photo of the fabric, then I can use the eyedropper tool, which is probably going to be here. No, that's Live Paint Bucket. There's going to be an eyedropper tool over here. All I know is that it's there somewhere. That's one of the learning parts of the learning curve in Illustrator, is figuring out where some of the tools are. Fortunately, we have the eyedropper tool, which is just I on the keyboard. And say I want to choose this color. Go back to my swatches. I can, if you watch up here in the upper right, where that little square is, that fill color, as I tap on the different colors here in the photo, it's going to choose that color. This is kind of a muted out picture of my zipped pattern. But the eyedropper tool can be very handy. So I use that fairly often. I can also, get rid of that. I can also, this might be of minor interest, but I'll show you anyway. I also design fabric, and I can fill a shape with a design that I've created. And you could do this with any pattern. So this is one of my designs from my mod holiday, and I can scale this down to size. That obviously is much too large for a pattern. So let's see what happens if I take it down to, say, 25%. I can scale it down. I could do that again and scale it down. So that may be of interest to you if you've got some patterns you want to insert. It's of interest to me, but it may not be to anyone else. So those are the shapes. Let's talk about rotation, etc., of those. And keep trying to make another rectangle. Stop it, Karen. There we go. If I want to rotate, I can choose the object, and I can go up to my menu bar at the top, choose Object, Transform, and then I have all kinds of choices, one of which is Rotate. And it will let me choose the angle that I'm going to use, that I want to rotate it. I hardly ever use that. Once in a while I do, if I have to scotia it a little. I may do one or two, but for the most part, I frankly don't use that. I just go to the corner of my shape and I wait until I get that rounded arrow, and then I just turn using that. Again, I can use the Shift key, which will constrain it, and it, I think, goes to the nearest, what is it, 15 degrees? And so I can get fairly precise. I don't have to be playing with that 30.8 degrees, 30.9 degrees. When am I going to hit 40? So I can, and again, if I want to rotate it to, hello, grab it, Karen. I can just hit the Shift key and it will give me perfectly vertical. Resizing, again, just grab a corner or a side. And of course they're easily moved around. Just select it and move it around. Much of this stuff is very similar to what you'll find in other programs. I can butt things right up against each other. If I duplicate that for, whoops, duplicate that, let's change that one to yellow. And now as I move it over, it's going to snap to it exactly. It will show me when I am in line with the center there, and it's going to snap. Well, it's going to snap. There we go. it will snap them together, so I'm not trying to do it on the keyboard, move it over a little bit and a little bit more, and no, that's too much, etc. Okay, so that's arranging those, and let's do arranging in terms of what's on top of something else. In Illustrator, you have layers, and if you think of layers as different pieces of maybe transparency on top of each other, and if you have, say, this blue piece, and it's on a transparency under this yellow piece, so you've got a sheet that has this yellow on it. If you have that sheet on top of the one with the blue on it, you can't move that blue up. There's no way you can see all of that blue unless you move that, and I didn't put those on separate layers. How silly is that? So I'm going to move that down below. There isn't any way that I can get this blue to be on top of this yellow as long as this piece, this layer, is on top of that layer. I can shift those layers over here so that the yellow is underneath the blue, and then it automatically shifts. And now there's no way I can get the blue underneath the yellow unless I move the layers. Now if they are on the same layer, and let's move this yellow back onto the blue layer, then I can move them around. So I can tell it that I want this yellow to, and this I can do up in Object, Arrange, Bring to Front, Bring Forward. You're probably accustomed to those in others, but there are also keyboard shortcuts. So say I want to move that one behind, I've got a keyboard shortcut that I can move. So that figures into arranging things if you want one thing on top of another. That has covered color. Let's talk a little bit more about color though. In swatches over here, you have specific palettes, and you can choose different palettes. You might have, there are some palettes that are built in. So say if we go to foods, and let's look at ice cream. And here are the choices that they have for, sorry, I can't get those swatches any larger, that you would have. And I could add what's on here into my palette up here. I'll just click on that and drag it up here, and now that whole folder of colors is a part of my working palette up here. You can also save swatches. So once you have created a swatch, if I want to keep this swatch, then maybe I've got a specific palette that I like to use, colors that I like to use when I'm designing quilts or when I'm doing patterns. Then I can save that palette, and or swatches they call it, and I can give it a name, and then I can call it up later under user defined, and you can see I have lots of palettes saved. And let's say call up my Mod Holiday, and now I can swing this palette up here, which I think I probably already have up here, but, and now I've got that palette that I've added. So I can just keep adding colors. I can do tints and shade, as I think I showed you earlier. So if I want to, say, do a lighter version of that color, of the yellow, then I can add that to my palette, and that could be my shading if I've got the wrong side of the fabric on top of it, for example. So I could, let's do another one of those and give it a shaded color. So that would indicate maybe the wrong side of the fabric. Oh yes, duplicating is pretty much the same as you might expect. You're probably used to Control-C, Control-V for copy and paste. On a Mac it would be Command-C and Command-V. Illustrator has an additional thing which, let me rotate this around here, which is kind of handy. Let me try that again. I use this all the time, can you tell? So I can do the copy and paste, but I also can use the Option key, which is, I'm going to say is the Alt key on the Windows, and click on it, hold down the Option key, and it will just drag down an exact duplicate. The other cool thing is, now that I've done that action and I have made a copy of this, I've pulled it down this distance, now I can repeat that last command and I get lots of copies of the same thing, which I don't know, you may find useful or not. I find that sometimes it is very useful. That, I think, is it for the shapes and the color. Let's talk about lines. If I go over to my tool over here, right click on it, then the line segment tool is one of my choices. Here's the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to choose it here so I'm not banging on my keyboard. This is a stroke, so I choose my stroke color over here. Right now I don't have a stroke color selected, so I won't get anything. It doesn't matter what the fill is because the fill has nothing to do with this line. But let's make it a black line so that you can see it. And this is a stroke, so I've got this little properties of the stroke here. 1 pixel is going to be hard for you to see, so I'm going to up that quite a bit. And the rectangle was still selected, so when I changed the stroke, I changed it on that rectangle as well. That's a bad habit of mine. I don't deselect something before I start something else. All right, so I pulled out this line. It's a consistent width, straight line. I can move it around all over. If I want it to be perfectly vertical, I'm going to hold the Shift key and it makes it vertical. So now I've got this line selected and I can, in fact, let me make it a little weightier. I think you'll be able to see it better. I ordinarily would not make a line this wide. Now I use lines to do the cutting and sewing lines. So I need solid lines like I have here and also dotted lines. With it selected, if I want it dotted, I can click on dashed line and then I can choose how long each of those dashes is. Right now it's at 1 pixel, which you probably can't even see. It makes this line look gray because there's so much white in it because the dashes are very teeny tiny narrow. So I'm going to change that. Let's say I change that to 30. I have to have it selected before I do that. I'm telling you, bad habits. And now you can see that it's a much more clear dotted line. And this I can change the color of, if I decide if I select it, if I decide that I want it to be a different color. Of course, I can do that with my stroke as well. And change the weight. I can also change the end cap. So if I want these to be rounded dashes instead of square-ended dashes, I can do that. And that is line. Now arrows. There may be a way in here to do an arrow, but I haven't found it yet. I haven't looked very hard, to be honest with you. So what I usually do when I'm going to do an arrow is draw a line, and I'm going to make that a normal cap, and I don't want it to be dashed. And then I can just draw an arrow with lines. I mean, it's not. So now I can do a line here and then do another line over here. However I want to make that arrow, and then I can group them all, and it's, you know, I can rearrange that a little better. I can also do a custom brush, which will be like a stamp brush, like a stamp, which is very easy to do. This isn't a very good arrow where I do it. I can just select this, add it to my brushes palette over here, and then I can just call that up, and every time I want an arrow, I can, let me at least group these, then I can just stamp it with that brush. So let me, oops, I thought I grouped that. Did I not group that? All right, now if I select that, I can treat it just as any other shape and move it around. I can, let's do a reflection up here. I select that object, transform, reflect, which is basically, I can flip horizontal or vertical or change the angle, or I can just move it around, rotate it. All right, I've cleared the deck, and next up is text. This will be the last thing that we'll demonstrate here. I have the text tool over here, which is just the T, or the, I guess they call it the type tool, sorry Illustrator, which is T on the keyboard, is the short keyboard shortcut. Up at the top here, I've got all kinds of properties up here all the time. So as I'm working on a shape or text or whatever, I've got all kinds of information about it up here, and it also allows me to change things up here. Now right now I've got the type properties up here, and at the moment I'm not worried. I can change the font here. I can change whether it's bold, regular, italic, depending on the font. 70, I have it set here at 72 point. I think the default is 12, which is always too small for what I want to do, so I just bump it up to 72. Then when I click or tap on the screen, it's going to give me the lorem ipsum dummy letters, and then I can just type whatever I want, which for me is most often going to be a size of a shape. You know, it's remarkably difficult to do this when the keyboard is much further down on my left than I'm used to. Now, I'm going to go off of the text tool, go back up to my selection tool here, and I can use this to change the size and proportion of it. I can do goofy things that would be completely unreadable, or I can use the Shift key, which is going to lock in that aspect ratio. This, just like anything, you can change the color of it. So I have in black, in this case it's a fill, not a stroke, because it sees it as kind of a shape. Not kind of a shape, it sees it as a shape. So the stroke color is black. I can change that to whatever color I want. And I remember to leave this selected. I'm proud of myself. I can now rotate it, for example, and use the Shift key to make sure it's perfectly vertical, which I sometimes do. Pardon me while I make you a little seasick here. As I come down here, and these diagrams, I have put the proportions because, again, I'm not putting text up here. Take a 1 1/4 by 3 1/2 inch or by 2 3/4 inch piece and sew it to the right side of the, I'm just showing it in a diagram. So it's much better if I have that text or those measurements in a vertical position. You can see that I have used here, I've layered this shape, the line on top of the square, which is on top of this diagram. So I've done arrangements. I don't know if I've done that in layers or not. I think I haven't in this case, though I certainly could. I could have had this base piece here on one layer, this blue square on top, and another layer. Then I've got the line, and then I've got the number. I could put each of those on separate layers. And I have shaded this, or chosen a tint shade, it's kind of both, of this blue to indicate that that's the wrong side of the fabric. Text, you can change the font. I find very little reason to do that when I'm doing diagrams, but you certainly could. So I could change this font to, I don't know, say a heavier font. It's possible. So options for that as well. So in summary, you can do lots of different shapes, change the sizes, change the orientation. The proportion is important to me, so I do those multiple factors. And you can change colors, of course, choose different colors. You can use the Eyedropper tool to pick up specific colors in a photo. You can stack things, arrange them. You can snap pieces together. When I am doing, and this isn't a pattern tutorial either, but If I want pieces to indicate that they're going to be sewn together, particularly if I don't have text, I will put them next to each other but not touching, and then once I get to a point in the pattern where those are already sewed together, then I'm going to butt them right up against each other. So now as I'm showing the sashings, they're a little bit separated, which means this is a piece that's going to go on this piece that's already pieced. So that's why that snapping and the proportions are important to me, so that you can see the relative proportions are really important to me when I'm doing a pattern, and Illustrator lets me do that pretty easily. Now that I've basically given you the pattern for Feynman Lives, we've reached the end of our program. If you have other questions or things that you didn't see demonstrated that you would like me to do, please put those down in the comments, and I will see what I can do about that, short of doing a tutorial, which I just don't plan to do. I don't know how many of you actually want to use Illustrator. That's it for my miscellaneous Sunday, which, you know, I just think it should be miscellaneous Monday somehow. I should come up with something for Sunday, some alliteration. On Wednesday, I will be doing another funky, wonky, log cabin-y kind of thing, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. Next Sunday, I am going to show you how I'm putting together one of the quilts that I designed in the design challenge. It's the one that was made from windshield wipers that looks like villas going up the hill. I've decided that I want to do that with foundation paper piecing, and I will show you how I went about designing that as a paper pieced pattern. I hope I will see you one of those times, if not all of those times. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. It helps the videos to get out to more people. I appreciate your comments and your support. That's it for today's demonstration. I hope I'll see you back here on my channel again. Love spending time with you. In the meantime, be well, be happy, be quilting. Peace out.